Hello again, this is Barton, and the next video will be a two-part video covering ground attack in the Focke-Wulf 190. Part 1 will deal with bombing specifically, Part 2 will deal with strafing specifically. Again, I'm in a Focke-Wulf 190A5, this time loaded with 4 SC-50s and 1 SC-500. The SC-50s are mounted on the wings, outboard of the landing gear, and the SC-500 is slung centerline. Our drop order is going to be the outside SC-50s first, then the inboard SC-50s, and then the SC-500. Your drop order is going to be very important for selecting targets when you go on your bomb runs. One other thing I want to talk about is the fusing. If you hit tab, you bring up your main menu. You can also see your fusings. There are 3 of them. You can toggle them in flight. You have to bind a key for it though. It's in the miscellaneous section of the controls. I have mine bound for Control F for control fusing. We're only really going to discuss and use 2 of them. It should be OV and VZ. OV is our instant and VZ is our long fuse. MV is in between, kind of. There's really no difference between MV and OV, so we're not going to use it. Obviously, OV and VZ have different times that you would use them. OV, the arming takes 3.5 seconds. For when you pickle the bomb, it's got a free fall for 3.5 seconds, and then it's armed and will detonate instantaneously upon impact with the ground. Now, VZ arms in 0.7 seconds, and the delay is 14 seconds. Now, if you drop either of these from an altitude lower than what is required for them to arm fully, when they hit the ground they will automatically arm and default to the 14-second delay. This is going to be important because if you drop on OV and your bombs are supposed to go off instantaneously and they don't, you want to make sure that the people coming in to attack behind you, if there are any, know about the live bomb that is in the area. If it's big enough, it could blow them up. And that's obviously not a good situation. So I'm going to get this aircraft in the air and go over to the bomb range, and then we'll discuss the 3 main types of bombing that we're going to do in the Focke-Wulf 190. Alright, now I'm getting in the area of the bomb range. The way I'm going to do this is I'll discuss one of the 3 tactics of bombing in the Focke-Wulf 190, discuss the pros and cons, and then I'll demonstrate it, and then I'll give an external view to the bomb run so that you get both an internal and external perspective of what's going on during all of the tactics. And the first one we're going to talk about is low altitude level bombing. In this one we're going to come across the targets at about 50 meters off the deck and just drop the bombs right on top of them. Our ingress to the target, unless it's briefed otherwise, is usually going to be around 1,000 meters or more, and this is for 3 reasons. One, it gives you altitude to navigate on your ingress. It also gives you enough altitude to work with if you have to go to defensive for any reason, if you have to pickle off your bombs and become a fighter and fight your way out against enemy aircraft. It gives you a little bit of altitude to work with. And lastly, once you get to your target area, if you still have your bombs, you can trade that altitude for airspeed and get to and through your target a lot quicker, minimizing your exposure to enemy fire and getting back over friendly lines as quickly as possible. Alright, so I've backed away from the bombing range to simulate arriving into a target area, and it's off my 11 o'clock now. Usually you're going to start your dive just outside of AAA fire, about the time 75 or bigger millimeter flat cannons are going to be able to shoot at you. Although you might have to delay it a little bit longer if you don't know exactly where your targets are. If they're buried into a city or something like that, you might have to wait a little longer so that you can actually get a good bearing on where your targets are. So full throttle, dump all of our altitude for airspeed. We're going to stay as low as we can and drop our bombs. Staying low, staying fast on our egress. You don't look over your shoulder, you just keep on going. Now, our staying low like that is going to give us a couple of advantages. One, is going to make us a lot harder to spot from the air. Two, it's also going to make us a lot harder to hit for anti-aircraft guns, as they're going to have to swivel faster because you're at a lower altitude. You're going much faster than normal, and buildings and things like that can get in their way. So their line of sight to you can be obscured, and they might not even have a shot. So depending on where their guns are positioned, they might not even be able to shoot at you throughout your entire attack run. However, it does have a lot of cons. One of the cons is that if someone does spot you down low, you're easy to jump. And if you do get jumped on your attack run or your egress, you don't have any altitude to work with. So there's only 3 ways you can go: left, right, or up. And those usually aren't good things to do when you're defensive. So you're going to have to rely on each other when you're down there to clear each other's six. And it's also a very good idea to make sure that you have at least some sort of high cover that can come in and help you out. I wouldn't ever, have everyone go in and use this tactic, as that would be somewhat suicidal, unless, of course, there's absolutely no air cover or enemy air cover in the area. Alright, the second tactic that we're going to use is glide bombing. Now, glide bombing can be done with anything from a 10 to 15 all the way up through, say, a 55-degree dive angle. Above 55 degrees, it starts to get into dive bombing, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about, but I'll delay that for later. Glide bombing, you're basically lobbing the bombs onto your target, much like your low altitude level bombing. However, being in a little bit of a dive, you have a little bit more reference as to how the bomb's going to drop. It's not, just all timing, although timing is a huge part of it. And it's pretty easy. Most people default to this, but we'll go ahead and give you a demonstration here in a minute, as soon as I can get myself set up. And I'll glide bomb those guys. Alright, here we go. Yep, and that was long. Wasn't really too well set up for it, but you're basically just going to put your crosshairs on the on your target, or slightly above your target, and just descend into them and drop your bomb. It takes a little bit of practice, get your timing down, but it's a lot more accurate than level bombing in the Focke-Wulf 190. Alright, last but certainly far from least is dive bombing. Dive bombing is a lot like glide bombing, but at a much steeper angle. And in this, it's going to be a lot more accurate, because you're going to be spiking your bombs down onto the target rather than just lobbing them down. And for this demonstration, we will select these 5 twin-engine bomber mock-ups as our targets. I don't think I'm going to be able to get all of them, but hopefully I can get as many as I can. That's they are. Right now I'm at 800 meters, so I'm probably going to need to get a little bit more altitude. So I'm going to egress a little bit, climb up, and then set myself up. Alright, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of dive bombing. One of the pros is that it's very accurate and it's very efficient. Your attack run usually doesn't take that long, the attack run itself. Most of it's going to be set up and then egress. It also gives you an immense amount of speed for your egress. However, that can be in itself a con, so you have to be aware of how fast you're going, because you can rip your wings off in just the dive, and at a much slower speed you can rip your wings off pulling out of the dive. So you have to be aware of that constantly. Also, if you get up to around 85 to 90 degrees of dive angle, it starts to get confusing, and you'll see that here in a minute. But I'm going to pause right here and discuss what's going on with my setup here. I'm starting to ingress to the target. I've offset myself to the left, putting the target off to my 1 to 2 o'clock. As I get closer to it, it's going to start to approach the leading edge of my wing. Once it gets to the leading edge of my wing, I'm going to start dropping that wing. I'm going to start giving a little bit of right stick. And that way I'll be able to keep my visual on the target all the way up through, up to and through my run. This also makes it easier to keep track of where the target's going to be if I have to look over my shoulder to check where my wingman is or check my 6 for enemy aircraft. But it's also, the closer I get, the more I'm going to have to drop my right wing, and that is going to put me into a turn. So when I offset, while I'm dropping my wing to keep the target in visual, I'm going to start a tighter and tighter turn and go directly over the top of our targets. As you can see here, as I get closer, it's starting to approach the leading edge. And right about here, I'm going to start dropping my right wing. And the target's going to appear to slide down your wing until it hits the wing tip. Once your target is at or just after your wingtip, that's your cue to start your attack. If you start your attack at this moment, you're going to get 85 to 90 degree dive angle. If you want a little bit less of a dive angle so that you can work your way up to it and it's a little less confusing, you can extend your approach past this point and then come back around underneath yourself, or you can start a little early. We're going to roll inverted, pull back on the stick, go into a straight dive, roll out for our egress, drop our bomb, and pull out. That will conclude part 1 of the ground attack on the Focke-Wulf 190. Part 2 covers strafing, and I suggest you watch that. But of course, practice, practice, practice. Anyway, have a good day. Salute.